I am primarily a one-to-one coach. I've worked with many CEOs and executives around the world, but particularly in Southeast Asia. I work in some of the upscale wellness resorts where people go to literally drop the bravado and to maintain their peace, their balance, and in a sense, discover who they truly are. And so my work is very guided by the inner self and being ever more conscious about what our drivers are from within the subconscious mind. I'm going to have fun with this too, okay? I'm introducing you to the front office. I often say it's one thing to know your personal brand in an exterior sense, and it's another thing to know your personal brand from within your deepest mind. And what you put on paper can be quite different. In fact, your paper sense, your curriculum vitae, is very much about your successes in terms of your degrees, your work experience, maybe a PhD. You may define yourself, your personal brand. In America, they'll own a Learjet, or your car, or your designer home, your clothes, maybe designer labels. But those labels are indeed designed by someone else. And my interest and passion is very much you designing your own labels and really beginning to connect with yourself and realize that it is what the qualities, the talent within those ingredients, when polished, when you polish what I call the inner jewels, if you like, that you can really radiate the truth of your brand. So I might call it the beauty from within. But in the context of my work, I very much invite you to develop the back office, which I'll move. Now, the back office can be quite substantially different from the front office. You will be quite amazed how some of the major contributors in the world will sit in front of me and say, I feel like I haven't achieved anything in my life. It is quite jaw-dropping how many hugely successful people, and they will include some of you here today, do not really truly own their success. I'll tell a few stories as this evolves. Fear can be one of the biggest drivers. Now, I acknowledge that fear can also be a positive driver because we need fear in certain situations. However, fear of being found out, fear of being found out I'm not good enough for the job. They made a huge mistake when they hired me. Even though these people have gone through several different levels, tiers of interviews, eventually with the CEO. A sense of low self-worth, a sense of anxiety. In this country, it's called, people often speak of nervousness. But these are low-octane fuel. And many of you certainly wouldn't run your car on fuel as some of you run your deepest mind. So the back office can be something of a toxic environment for some people, even though on the exterior they have this wonderful and dramatic and marvelous sense of bravado. You may wonder where these labels come from. I describe the front office as your conscious mind, the back office as a deeper mind, your subconscious mind. Your subconscious mind records every situation, every event, every success, every possible humiliation, embarrassment. And of course, if we could remember all our embarrassments, we simply wouldn't function. So the conscious mind is like a filter. And it filters maybe, can keep apparently maybe 9 or 10 events running at once, apparently. But the deeper mind, this back office, is huge. It's like they sometimes use the analogy of the iceberg. So the back office has phenomenal power and influence. And the thing is, the front office, sorry, go back. Can I go back? Can you help me out? Sorry.
You have to signal that way.
Okay, sorry. Oh, okay. Oh, got you. Never mind, but you've got the front. The front office, we feel when we make conscious choices, we have a sense of control. When we choose our clothes, when we choose our car. But for people who are, say, sometimes described as shopaholics, who need to purchase new material things every day, they are being driven by other motivations that are coming from the back office. They're filling up with things that fuel their self-esteem, things that fuel their sense of self-worth, things that make them feel better about themselves. They can wear the designer label, but again, they may not be feeling these designer labels at another level. Imagine, some of you, I acknowledge, own your own companies, but the majority here did apply probably for their job. And imagine how many of us could apply or make application for a role if the application form said only whole beings may apply. We've all got emotional leaks. We've all got a part of us which does not match the exterior brand. Now, of course, today you probably apply online. Maybe you print out the accompanying letter for the job that you're applying for. Maybe the only handwriting that you actually do is a signature at the end of the letter. Now, of course, those of you that can remember to handwrite, in the good old-fashioned days, an employer always asked you to accompany your application with a handwritten letter. And of course, the brightest companies then hired a freelance graphologist to take a look at the handwriting. And what's amazing about handwriting is that it is phenomenally accurate. And it can, graphologists can analyze your creativity. This is an imaginative person. This is a person that steps out of the box. This is a very fast and furious creative thinker. But it can also look at the slants on your writing or the length of the tails on the D or the G, and they can sense whether your leanings are towards qualities that may not be so desirous of your brand. And so any HR person who was worth a salt may well hire a graphologist, and you would think that part of your brand was hidden. But to someone who employed one of these people, it most certainly would not be the case. Executive truth is stranger than fiction. Imagine, and this may be a big imagining because people are we're so wonderful at hiding our fears. But there are an amazing number of managers who will sit around a boardroom table and the talent of the moment, Mr. or Miss right now, may be terrorized by having to present the interim report each week around the boardroom table. There may be a fabulous female executive who blushes, and someone who is able to delegate to someone else. Years ago, I worked with the chap who'd won Entrepreneur of the Year award, and at that time, Richard Branson was going to hand over the award. And Richard Branson at that time did not do public speaking. He did television, he did radio, he did all these outrageous dramatic things, but he didn't do public speaking. But of course he could seamlessly delegate to someone who did, and nobody would even question the possibility that he had a fear of public speaking. There are people whom I've worked with who, at a younger age, they're going for promotion, and they realize in their 20s that having a stammer or a speech that's slightly punctuated does not serve them in the course of realizing a promotion. And often guys, actually. And what they're amazed to discover, I do a therapy which is in uses relaxation. What they're amazed to discover is that as a bright young 10-year-old, they discover that this seemed like a great idea to get out of reading at school. Such a shy young boy developed a strategy to absent themselves from doing something they did not wish to do. Bright idea at the time. But of course, as you evolve, as you progress, as you go for promotions, young men realize this is not serving them. And of course, they're incredibly surprised to discover that they set this up, that it was a strategy which evolved and developed over a number of years. And the truth is, as women will say, I thought I'd grow out of blushing. What tends to happen is that we grow into habits and behaviors, and they seem incredibly to get slightly worse. So what is quite remarkable with relaxation therapy is that you can almost work on your emotional resume, your emotional CV, and bring your emotional resume bang up to date with your work resume, so that a person feels more authentic, a person feels more integrated, and more, going back to that, more whole, and more representative of who they wish to be in full magnificence, so that their brand is much more congruent, much more sympathetic with their entire profile of whom they wish to present themselves as. Other examples are management who can get out of flying, say, because it's amazing. People may force themselves to fly, and they'll actually come to someone like myself, perhaps, when push comes to shove. I remember a young woman years ago, she got the opportunity to go and interview a famous sports personality, and that really gave a sufficient push to transcend and recover from her fear of flying. I was going to give you one or two examples to illustrate this sense of how often we can leak, the back office can leak into the front office and express within us behaviors that do not do us justice. Some of you here will remember the Deputy Prime Minister, John Prescott. And he's something of a classic because he really had seemingly very little control over his anger. And it's expressed here in, say, road rage. And road rage even there is a sense of low self-worth, low self-esteem, if you become very upset that the person doesn't let you pass. This very much is about becoming more conscious of what is going on at a deeper level. But John Prescott, he failed one exam. It is 11 plus, years and years ago, of course. And he never got over it, basically. He didn't come and see me. And although I wrote to him at the House of Commons after someone threw an egg at him, and as Deputy Prime Minister, he basically went for them. So he didn't do himself justice. He clearly wasn't celebrating who he was right now. He was still looking through a rearview mirror of the past, of failing this one exam, which, to be fair, was then a pivotal exam in England because it determined whether you went to grammar school or not. But Mr. Prescott never got over it. And if he would have positioned himself to go back and access in relaxation that younger child, but he would have been able to tell this young kid, but I did this and I did this and I achieved this, and my goodness, now you're Deputy Prime Minister of Britain. Isn't that amazing? But seemingly, he went for the Jaguars, I think. I think he had 3. So he expressed himself materially in a front office way, but his back office was never congruent and probably never will be. But I come in for some surprises sometimes. I worked in Asia with a man who is one of the world's foremost traders. And I think his wife had really dragged him to this wellness resort. And he was so pissed off about spending 700 quid a night at this place. And he just happened to be the one person that showed up at a talk. Happily, there's very many more this evening. But it was great. It was his day. So he, of course, wanted to interview me before he was actually going to set foot in and have a session with me. And this he did. But he also shared, he was very authentic. He shared that he was one of the world's foremost risk takers, but he could not take a risk with his own money. He did not take risks in his life at all. He could not make decisions for himself. Again, the back office leaking into the front. But he was such a whiz with other people's money. Headhunted, flown around the world. He had enough money for 30, 40 lifetimes, but he couldn't spend it. His wife was close to exiting. You know, she wanted to have fun and live in the now. And it's really interesting. And I really have to express that with my work, people always know the context. What they don't realize is the link and the correspondence. And this man, he went back to his childhood. And his childhood had been a realm of great struggle, especially financial struggle. And this is such a common theme in my work. Hugely successful people, fashion designers especially, they're often from very humble backgrounds. You know, you think of Alexander McQueen, you know, he would have phenomenal magnificence, but he didn't realize just how magnificent he was. And his back office, his inner engine was pretty toxic. And this man, what we were able to do was, as I say earlier, with this clarity, he said, my goodness, I get it. That there'd been so much struggle. They'd really never known, you know, where the next meal was coming from. And this insecurity, which is also very common in executives, was still very much feeling is present. I can't tell you the liberation and the freedom this man got from 3 sessions. And of course, probably saved his marriage. You're probably aware of the executive who, you know, bangs his fists on the table and says, I want it now, right now. You know, that there's an impatience. And sometimes, you know, they can behave like 2-year-olds. So they're not, as people, we're not always, as management, we're not always very conscious. And so, in a way, what I'm asking you to do is to look in the context of your brand, your thoughts, your vocabulary, to really, really listen to help you maintain more balance. To have balance as opposed to this outer bravado, so that your inner emotional world really shines and does you justice and is congruent with the brand, as Mark described it, your personal brand, exterior brand. And a lot of this balance can really come from listening to yourself and listening to your heart. You know, how interesting if you think, Mark talked about listening with your eyes. I talk about listening with your heart. And what's very interesting is, if you think of the word heart, within the word heart is the word ear. And the art of listening also falls within heart. And when you listen to yourself, when you allow, you yourself to become so much more conscious of your inner vocabulary, what's called your self-talk. Because I take a view that the language, the words, the phrases, the sentences we use to describe ourselves are as important as the nutritional food content we put into our mouths. That if we are eating junk vocabulary, that is what the subconscious hears. And unfortunately, the subconscious makes no distinction. That's why so much of our imbalance, if you like, can come from teenage years or childhood, because as children, we imbibe every word, every phrase, every sentence. We eat, the good peas and the bad peas. And teachers and adults around us are gods. They're our major influence. We do not have necessarily the ability to discern what is good for us and what is not good for us. As adults, we do. And so when you speak to yourself, I really encourage you to choose words that celebrate yourself, that do fuel self-confidence, self-belief, self-esteem, security, and self-admiration and goodness. It's not being, what would the church say? They put you down, but it's about putting yourself up, because if you don't celebrate yourself, who does? We need to be our own cheerleaders and have a brand that is cheering to other people as well. And the great thing is that you well know that when you're positive, people like being around that brand. You're magnetic, you're attractive. And so to be aware, I sometimes say, rediscover, I'm saying rediscover handwriting, rediscover that great book, Russia's Thesaurus. My dad introduced me to it when I was about 9, and it's so full of fabulous vocabulary and words and phrases which you may have forgotten and discover are delightful. So listening to yourself can help bring that inner balance and peace. And I should say listening to others, because I would say that listening to other people is one of the most sexy things you can do. Switch off your phone when you go into a meeting and just be really surprised that these people think, wow, because you really are giving the present of presence. And people know you're serious. Let your thoughts fall away and just be with that person. And so, suddenly, as we work on ourselves, as we become more conscious of ourselves and we ingest and imbibe this more nutritional vocabulary and dump these rogues and saboteur thoughts that do not do us justice, we can enhance our calm, our sense of courage, our sense of self-belief. And here we have this huge Aston Martin engine, which absolutely has to run on nutritional fuel, otherwise it wouldn't start. So I invite you to really champion yourselves, to love yourselves, and to think about when you are creating your outer brand, but my goodness, this inner brand is the 9/10 of me. The outer self is the 1/10. So please work on getting that 9/10 polished, shiny, and va-va-voom.